Yes, Happy New Year. SNL Stats is back. It is 2021, and I am so excited to bring you our first show of the new year. It is a new tradition that every time we have a few weeks off between shows, we have our very special By the Number show. We get to nerd out, into talking about which cast members are doing well this season, which cast members aren't doing so well, and we get to do that all with our SNL Stats guru, Mike Murray. So, Mike, let me bring you in. How you doing? Happy New Year.
I'm good. Good to see you guys again in 2021, approaching episode 900. Not of this show.
Right, we are.
Yeah. I mean, we could be getting to episode 900 of this show anytime soon. You never know. Andy Hoglund is with us from SNL in Review. He loves going over the analytics, so we had to have him back. Andy, how are you doing? Happy New Year.
I'm doing well. Happy New Year to you as well, John. I'm excited for a new year, new era, and a new episode of SNL Stats. Mike, good to see you again.
Good to see you, Andy.
All right. So for everybody watching, we hope everybody is safe and healthy and had a great New Year's. And if you haven't checked out our first By the Number show, so we did that between the first 6 episodes of the season during the October run and the last 3 that aired in December. So basically what we do on this show is we get to talk a little bit more about how the individual cast members of Saturday Night Live are doing. We go by the rule, which you probably heard me say before, that comedy is a subjective, thing to talk about. People find different things funny, but is it possible there is an objective way to evaluate how the cast members are doing on a given episode or in a given season? And that's where our friend Mike comes in. Mike developed these rankings. It is an objective way to evaluate how well a cast member is doing. And we reviewed that on our first By the Numbers podcast. So if you want to go back and check that out. But since then, we have actually adjusted some of the rankings per your suggestions. People in the community reached out and they said, hey guys, maybe you're not thinking about this aspect or that aspect. And I spoke to Mike and we adjusted some of those things. So Mike, I'm going to bring you in. Explain to the audience how this new ranking system works and the one that we're going to move forward with to evaluate season 46.
Well, I'll just remind everybody of what it is. It's really just an average, 2 averages that are weighted average together. So one is screen time and one is appearances. And we take the, if you appear on the show, we rank them into 4 categories and then combine those. And then you get a percentage of that score. We take your screen time of that episode and you get a percentage of that runtime. So those combine together and we just divide them by 2. And then that's how you get the score. So it's simpler than it looks. But the new thing, which is fun, is we gave more weight to what we call prime time on the show. So if you appear between the cold open and update, kind of have deemed that more valuable time because it gets more eyeballs live on the show. It's not too late, and it gets more eyeballs usually on the next day and YouTube and that kind of thing. So now that is weighted in at 1.25. So it's, I take that, whatever percentage of prime time you get, times that by 1.25, average that with the total runtime score. And it just gives you like a little bump. It doesn't make anything too drastic from what we did before, but it just gives a little bit more emphasis on those segments that people talk about the next day, like the cold open and update, or like, the sketch after the monologue. And then the new thing too was giving bonus points to the appearances if you have a recurring character, and just for fun if you say live from New York at Saturday night, because who wouldn't want to say that? So if you get to say that on that night, you get a half point added to your appearance score.
Yeah. And Andy, as a journalist that covers the show, I think these are really important additions, because I'm sure in all the community of people that read your articles on Entertainment Weekly or Vulture and follow you, when you ask them, how do you guys think this episode was, or which cast members you think did well? Oftentimes they're talking about, which cast members appeared in this primetime spot.
Right. Yeah. I was just going to say that implicitly, I think whether people realize it or not, they're talking about this kind of formula. If you're appearing prominently in an episode, Mike, it sounds like it's really trying to nail down from a qualitative standpoint, from a statistical standpoint, what people are catching on to and gravitating to regardless. So I'm excited to see how the formula has evolved and changed. It kind of reminds me of, the Matrix only grows smarter. These things tend to refract onto themselves, and it kind of adds a new layer to the adage that comedy is tragedy plus time. Now we can actually talk about the time in a significant way, which is fun.
Yeah, exactly. So let's get into the rankings. I'm sure, most of the audience is curious about which cast members are doing well and which are not. I'm going to bring a chart that Mike prepared onto the screen. So we're going to start with this first chart that Mike prepared. Mike, I'll let you kind of get into it. This is the SNL Power Rankings for each cast member for the first 9 episodes. We have the scores displayed, and we have our averages and our total score. So Mike, can you just explain the chart for anyone who's watching, and what really stands out to you? Like, what should Andy and I look at this chart, and what numbers are the most important that we should look at?
Well, right now they're in order of total points of the season. This is why, if you're looking at it on the video, that like 80 is last, because she scored the fewest points this season. She's only really been in one episode and had a small appearance in the other. So that's the order they're in right now. So we have Kate McKinnon at the top. She's number 1, Beck right behind her, and Jost right behind him. So up the top of the screen is each number of the episode, so 1 through 9. And then their score, I have, just for fun, I have their lowest and their highest. Lowest in red, highest in green. So what we're looking for is just, the highest score means the highest impact in that episode. If there's 50 appearances by someone, not one person, but the entire cast, and you have 7 appearances, that's going to mean more than 7 appearances in an episode that features 70 roles in that episode. So it is weighted in that way to be fair to different seasons of the show and cast size and that type of thing. We want to eliminate as many variables as possible. So a high score for me is anything over 60. So if you look at Kate, she's averaging over 100 per episode. After the first episode, it's basically been about 100 or more per episode, sometimes even as high as 160, which is like what you would get for a host, would be like that high of a score. Around like 200 would be like the host score. Yeah. So that's basically what we're looking at here. And then I did, just because this season is different than normal, I did have a second column of average that was fair to the cast members who were not in, the studio for a couple, like 80, Cecily, and then Chris Redd and Keenan for a week.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I look at this, I don't know how many of our listeners are crossovers between fantasy sports, players and people who love SNL. But as myself, I do fantasy football and I do fantasy basketball. And I look at these numbers, and it's really interesting to see, because a lot of times you'll look at the average fantasy points that an athlete will put up in a given game. And that's how you'll do your draft rankings when you're picking players for your team. So oftentimes, if we were to draft our own SNL team, which we may do at some point, you would start to look at, Kate and Beck, those top 2 are really like, if you get the first overall pick, you're taking one of those people, because, they don't dip too low. They don't, they go up pretty high. I mean, like you said, Mike, Kate tops out at 163, Beck tops out at 160, and with a score of 60 being a good score, I mean, those are amazing scores for episodes. So, Andy, what stands out to you in this chart?
Yeah, I just to kind of echo what you're saying, with the fantasy sports, it's like, who has the best win above replacement here, and particularly in the case of Beck, I think last time we discussed this, we were going into just Beck's pivotal role in the cold opens. I think he's not necessarily considered as iconic as someone like Kate or Keenan, who still have very high numbers, particularly in Kate's case. But Beck just being such a flexible impressionist, whether it's Mitch McConnell or Mike Pence or Wolf Blitzer, it really I think these numbers reflect how pivotal he is to at least the show during the election year.
Yeah, definitely. And Mike, I think like, like whenever you're doing some type of scientific study, you often have to pick a question that you're trying to answer. And I think that the questions that I want to answer tonight is like, number one, who is the MVP of the season, or who are the MVPs of the season? And is it just Kate and Beck because they're at the top of the rankings, or are there, other cast members that stand out as potentially those MVPs? And then I also kind of want to look at some trends. Like, we had our numbers that we looked at after the first 6 episodes. Is there anyone who's really trending up in the last, 3 episodes, or trending down? And so I guess like, we'll take those one at a time. Mike, if you had to pick like an MVP, is it the obvious answer of a Kate or Beck, who are at the top of the rankings? Or is it not so simple just because, those 2 cast members have been around for so long, it's just so obvious?
Well, I'll touch on what Andy said, which is about Beck in the cold open. And one thing that I don't think I covered last time, I do take advantage of the segments. So if you look at every second that Beck has been on screen, over 30%, about 30.5%, has been in the cold open. So a third of the time you're seeing Beck Bennett in SNL, it's in the cold open, and Kate is up there too. So clearly that's like, also the cold opens this season have been like extraordinarily long. So if you're featured in them, your screen time score is gonna be pretty high. So Kate's is 24% and Beck's is 30%. So right there, like, not only are they high scorers, but it's due in part or a lot because of the cold open. And then to answer your question, John, I would say that I also look at like versatility. So if you think about SNL, other than the monologue, which, a couple cast members, Kate and Keenan and Pete this season, have appeared in a monologue. It's not necessarily that rare, but other than that, it's the cold open, sketches, pre-tapes, and then update spots. So if you're able to appear in all those things, I would just deem that as a very valuable member of the team. And that's why I want to just point out Pete and Heidi, because not only are they up there, like they're, on the ranking, if you can see it on the screen, for cast members, but they've appeared in all of those things. Heidi's been in 32% of her time is in update. So it's like, not only is she in the pre-tape, we saw her in like, the Lexus commercial and things like that, but she'll be in sketches, and she'll, she was in 1 cold open at least, or 2 cold opens, and she's been in sketches. So I think like, if you look at that sort of thing, that would be an MVP in my opinion.
Yeah, that's true. And for those who are listening on audio, we have Heidi coming in at number 7. So she's the 7th cast member on this list. And we have Pete coming in at 9. Heidi's averaging 63.75. So that's above Mike's, good average of 60. And Pete is coming in at 58.8. So that's right under Mike's Mendoza line that he puts out for the good number to go through.
Can I co-sign that actually for a moment as well too?
Go for it.
Because John, when you first asked the question, I absolutely agree with Mike, that I immediately thought of Pete and Heidi as people who, they're not necessarily thought as the center of the show like someone like Kate or Keenan is, but they do have that kind of versatility. And we may have talked about this on a previous podcast episode before, but for me, someone like Kate, despite the numbers, I always kind of think of it as Kate being Kate. It's almost like SNL has this like subsection of the Kate McKinnon show or something. Whereas I think someone like, Heidi consistently, to Mike's point exactly, brings different kinds of characters, can appear in different kinds of sketches. And then weirdly, Pete Davidson, who has this reputation as being so one note, this year has, and the numbers appear to tease this out with the exception of episode 3, is really, making contact with the ball and getting on base to go back to fantasy baseball for a moment, which is, again, it's just very surprising, because there's such a backlash against him in some quarters of SNL fandom, but clearly, he has that je ne sais quoi star factor coming out of King of Staten Island.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I mean, like those are some great MVPs. I will read out the entire rankings for anyone who's listening on audio. So you guys, if you don't see the chart ahead of us, it is Kate, Beck, Colin, Keenan, Che, Ego, Heidi, Mikey, Pete, Kyle, Chloe, Chris, Bowen, Alex, Lauren, Melissa, Cecily, Punky, Andrew, and then 80. So that is the list. One of the things that stood out to me, and like I said, I wanted to talk about some trends from the first 6 episodes to the last 3 we did, is there is a line on Mike's chart here that talks about the full cast and their, Mike, is it the total score that one, like the third from the bottom, that list?
Totally. Yep. So
I noticed that there is a crazy trend, which is like the first 3 episodes, we're getting scores that are 800, 900, 1,000, 900, 731 for episode 6. Those are lower scores for the entire cast. And then when you get into episode 7, 8, or 9, if you add up every single person in the cast score for episode 7, 8, and 9, we're talking now at 1142, 1085, and 1130. So that's a pretty big bump. What's the reason for that? Is that because the election's now over and now they're using the cast members more?
Yeah, no Jim Carrey, no Alec Baldwin, less Maya Rudolph. There you go.
Okay. So that was something that I thought like really stood out to me with regards to like an interesting number to look at. Are there other trends that you see in the last 3 episodes that have changed from when we were in election season?
Well, the obvious, we have Cecily back. I assume we'll get 80 back when we January 30th. But I think probably the 3 new people. So Andrew, Punky, and Lauren, like they're just like actually getting sketch time. So their scores really couldn't be much lower. So they're getting higher. So that's probably what stands out to me.
Yeah, it seems like the majority of people's high scores are in 7, 8, and 9. So that makes sense. Andy, what about you? Anything else that you noticed trend-wise between episode 7, 8, and 9 and the first 6?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously great to see some of the newer cast members finally being given a chance to show why they're on the show. I think the show's been operating under the skeleton crew situation that particularly, as you both are saying, now that the election's gone and we're kind of lessening the celebrity hemorrhage, so to speak, the cast is allowed to really kind of flex its muscle and then operate as a team, which is, fundamentally what, I think people turn to watch SNL for is to see, this ensemble, operate at a very high comedic level. And that, at least personally, has been, one of my, main sources of criticism over the past couple of years, during the Trump years, is just that disconnect. So the last couple of episodes have been fun in that regard.
Yeah, definitely. So here's what I want to do before we move on to other charts and graphs that Mike created. I want to do a little bit of a mini game with you guys, and I want to go around the panel, and I want to get one buy low candidate and one sell high candidate from each of you. So basically, I'm going to ask you, give me somebody on the bottom of the list that if you were to invest in for the second half of the season, based on the numbers that you see in this chart, give me the reason why you would buy low on that person, and then give me the reason you would sell high on somebody in the top of the chart. So, Mike, why don't I start with you since you created these numbers yourself?
I would definitely. That's a great question. I'd probably buy low, right? On the chart on Lauren, because she just hasn't. She's the only cast member on here that hasn't had a lead yet, and so they probably have something cooking up for her, like an update character or some sketch that she can be in. So and she said live from New York twice now. That's important. That's a distinction. Maybe we get more Karen Pence. I don't know, but and then I would probably sell on probably Kyle, because he's kind of right in the middle. But I think he's probably or Keenan. They have to. I think they're stepping aside a little bit, especially for the other guys in the cast. You'll probably see Bowen and Chris step up into spots that they're in now.
Okay, so if you If Keenan's on your fantasy team, you're trying to trade Keenan away for the second half of the season and trying to buy some Lauren stock right now.
Basically, I mean, I would never want to trade Keenan, but he's pretty high up there. I don't see Kate and Beck, especially if this could be their last season, taking a back seat in their last episodes.
Yeah. All right, Andy, how about you? Give me one buy low candidate and one sell high candidate.
Yeah, following that logic a little bit, I think, and maybe this is a little bit of a cheat. Let me know. I want to buy Cecily or 80, and again, going to the sports metaphors as we're doing, I kind of see them as the MVP star athletes who have been on the DL or the IR or whatever it's being called these days for the first half of the year. You know, they're recovering from Tommy John surgery. Or what have you. You know, 80's returning from her show. Cecily apparently is back. Although the last episode she was absent. So I'm in on both them. You know, I think that they're gonna perform, particularly if this is indeed their final half season, which people keep reading tea leaves on. And then on the flip side of that, you know, I guess Keenan and Chris or Kate. I believe all have projects, you know, going into the second half of you know of the year here. So I'd probably sell Kate and Keenan just because we know that they're working on different things.
Yeah, that makes sense. And if you know, we're talking about Cecily, Mike has two different columns here where he has the average of the scores of the first 9 episodes, but then he also has an average where you take out the zeros, you know, those episodes where those cast members aren't there. And if you look at the difference in Cecily's score, I mean, she's scoring an average of 19.74 for the season, but on the episodes she's there, she's at 82.68. Which means that if she was in every single episode, she would actually be third on our rankings.
Yeah, so, like she's there, she's a star.
Like exactly.
Yeah.
And I know people will be asking for 80, who was basically in like one pre-tape in the 3rd episode, I believe, and then Oli in the 1st episode. And her average right now is 73.25. So she would be in 5th if she was there every week. Yeah. So like for me, my buy low candidates, and I'm surprised that neither of you said this, I'm selling my house. I'm selling everything to buy Alex Moffat stock. I mean, this is a guy who is, I guess, 7th from the bottom in terms of cast. We talk about him being super underutilized, and he is just given the role of the president of the United States. And, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if every episode for the rest of the season, he is above that 60-point range. So to me, that's the obvious buy low candidate.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That makes a lot of sense, assuming that they keep him at Biden and they're not doing some other bait and switch.
Yes, for sure. But I mean, if, like I said, I'm trading everything because I hope that they're not going to do something like that.
Sure. I like it.
And then for my sell high, you know, I know you guys said potentially Kate has a project and Keenan has a project, but I'm going to go with Colin. I think, you know, Colin right now is in 3rd, Che is in 5th, and I know you're going to get consistency from these guys who are on Update, because Update is an important part of the show, and these guys are the faces of Weekend Update, and they get, you know, screen time every single week. But I'm of the belief that, you know, Colin may be heading towards his end of his time on the show. And I think, you know, you saw something in episode 9, which was really interesting. And Mike, I'm going to ask you about it, is that, you know, all 3 people at the Update desk went over to Michael's side in episode 9. Now, you know, that could just, you know, be happenstance. It could just be that the characters were created to interact with Michael, and it is what it is. But I wouldn't be surprised if, as we get through the season, that you see a little bit more screen time for Che and not as much for Jost, because I think there is a chance that in season 47, Che could be hosting Update himself. So, Mike, I'll bring you in on that.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I mean, look at Collins. His lowest score is the 1st episode, and that was when Che had the guests, and then the most recent episode, and he had 3 guests, and they were all Che's. So we had Heidi, Chris, and Keenan, and they all were on Che's side. But same logic I used before. If Colin is leaving, I can't imagine that they would give him less guests. They'd probably bring all their favorites back to sit on Colin's side. But I think for the last episode, maybe like you said, John, that they were just written to sit with Che. But he was so due. I mean, he was getting like almost half the screen time as Colin. He was getting less jokes and no guests. So it almost seemed like a makeup call. Like he needs to interact with some of the characters.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so let me bring up some of the other stuff that Mike put together for us tonight, and we can kind of go over those. All right, Mike. So this is a chart that I just brought up on screen. This is the cast's average score per episode. So this is just, if I understand this correctly, this is just a chart that's displaying the average of the charts that we just saw.
Absolutely. I just left out Cecily and 80 because they were throwing off the mean in the middle. Because if you went by, as we said earlier, if you threw Cecily and 80's like average asterisk score, they would have been up there, and it kind of wouldn't be appropriate to everybody else who's been there for 9 weeks straight. So that's 18 out of 20 cast members, and so they're in the same order as the total scores that we saw in the first chart. But this just kind of gives us more perspective about, as you said, that the Mendoza line of 60 right here, we see it's at 54. So Pete and up is where you want to be right now.
You know what I love about the Mendoza score, by the way, I don't know, Mike, if it's arbitrary or how you came to that, is there's always been discussions historically around what's the ideal number cast size, and this, if I'm counting right, gets us at 9. Which, if you look at like SNL season 13, I think you have 8 full-fledged cast members and like 2, featured players. I'm looking at it right now. So it's very fitting that this number is kind of right where like a classic cast in the show's history is, if that makes sense.
Totally. I mean, even I think we talked about the last time we were together was there was 9 cast members on episode 1 of the show.
Right.
Yes, for sure. And but Mike, if you went back into those old seasons, I want to make sure I remember correctly, and you were to look at any of the casts that did have 9 or under, would every single cast member be above our Mendoza line, or there would be a couple that would be under, just to be proportional to what we have now?
Definitely not. I mean, they wouldn't all be up there because they always have had stars. They've had A players and B players. So you're going to have Chevy and Belushi just knocking it out of the park, and have, poor Lorraine Newman and Garrett Morris be at the bottom. I mean, even though there's less competition, there's also less opportunity for those supporting characters and supporting players.
But it just shows, though, that there's this cast in particular is so swelled that having that Mendoza line suggests perhaps that, if this was a different era of SNL, the ones above the Mendoza line would be the ones actually on the cast, and maybe we wouldn't have so many of these additional people who, are scraping at the bottom all the time.
Definitely. Let's get into screen time a little bit more, which is one of the factors that, is one of the 2 main criteria that we talk about. And Mike prepared some charts that have to do with screen time. So I'm going to bring a couple of those onto the screen right now. And let's go over here. I'll bring this one up. Okay, so I just brought up a chart that has the screen time for season 46. It includes some guests, but for the purposes of our discussion, we'll take those out of the equation for now. But Mike, is there anything here that stands out to you? Because you have the actual total screen time for every single cast member in the first 9 episodes, but then you also have columns that have how many minutes they were in pre-tapes, how many they were in sketches, how many they were in the cold open, and how many they were in update.
Yeah, I just figured it was one more wrinkle for not only us to talk about, but to kind of mine and see what we remember. Because if you're in the 10-1 sketch, then you're gonna get more time. But if we and also the question is, do we value pre-tapes less than sketches? Some people would say the best thing that happened to SNL was Lonely Island, Chronicles of Narnia, Dick in a Box, all that kind of thing. But some people would say that, the pre-tapes are just never as good as the live sketches, and it's a whole different thing. So I figured that was an important distinction to make. It's not necessarily as valuable as we talked about earlier, like the prime time versus total time, but it is something. And as I pointed out earlier, like, and Andy said, like Beck Bennett, Kate McKinnon, they're at the top of the screen time list because they're both almost 15 minutes of just cold open time.
And is there any like percentage that people are like overwhelmingly in pre-tapes versus sketches, or vice versa, that like stands out to you as like, this is kind of odd, like this person is never in a pre-tape but they're only in sketches, or vice versa?
Pre-tapes, the leaders are Beck and Ego, and I think they've both had a couple. One where they were really the star. Beck had that one, social justice warrior recording his video. He also had that one. He's, Ego's boyfriend begging for her to, come back. So if you're on screen and there's only two people in the whole scene, you're going to eat up a lot of that time, instead of like an ensemble like last with the Kristen Wiig, we saw like the Christmas morning, where like they're all just like quick cuts. Everyone's sharing the spotlight.
Yeah. Andy, what do you think about anything here? Is this anything that stands out to you?
I mean, it just shows, again, I'm a broken record a little bit, but just the consistency of Beck Bennett this season has been striking. I'm a little disappointed and shocked to see that Bowen, while getting decent material and sketches, screen time that is totally absent from the cold open in every way, and has a very minor cameo in the pre-tapes. If the season had was starting right now, I would have pegged him for a little bit more consistency than what we've seen here.
Yeah, it's really crazy if you were watching the YouTube and you see this chart and you just look at the cold open column. It's like Mike was saying, Kate and Beck, they dominate these cold opens. They have 16 minutes and 38 seconds for Beck and 14 minutes and 20 seconds for Kate. But then everybody else, with the exception of Mikey and Heidi, is approximately around 2 minutes or less in the cold opens for the season. So, I mean, it's really crazy. Like Andy was saying, no time at all for Bowen in any cold open, none for Andrew or Punky. And obviously Colin and Shay and 80. But I mean, really, Mikey's at 6 minutes 53, Heidi's at 5 minutes 40 seconds, and then everybody else. I mean, we're talking like 4 seconds for Melissa in a cold open, which I believe was off screen, and then 31 seconds for Pete in a cold open this season. So there is just an overwhelming disparity between a couple of our cast members, which really explains why Kate and Beck are dominating the season, because they're just killing it in the cold open, which is such an integral part of the show. Mike, anything else stand out to you here?
Well, exactly. I think last time we were together, Andy also said the best way to improve your score is get a political impression. If you play Mike Pence, you're going to get a ton of screen time. So just that Beck fit that role, I guess. He's guaranteed to be that, especially when he's not Alec Baldwin being Trump or Jim Carrey or Maya Rudolph. So by default, he is the leader on the cold opens. It's another reason why the power rankings exist, is because you can't just do screen time alone and say, if you are in the cold open, you're the best person on SNL. That's the cold opens, but also some people are like that on Update, not just the host of Update, but we mentioned Bowen hasn't been in any cold open, but he's he's had his one spot on Update in the first episode, and he was just one of the Village People, another one. And then Heidi is like a star on Update.
Yeah, it's true. If you look at the Update scores, I mean, obviously Colin and Shay, they're the Update correspondents. They're the ones that are going to dominate it. But the next highest one is Kate. She has 13 minutes and 3 seconds, and a couple of those are very long. Doctor, we notice. And then besides that, we have Heidi, who has had multiple guest spots, and this is where everyone. It's obvious when you're watching the show that Heidi makes her money on Updates, but it's actually fun to see that she's fairly consistent when you talk about Heidi. She's in some pre-tapes, she's in some sketches, she has like probably the average amount of screen time in sketches, and she has time in the cold open, and she has time on Updates. So she's like Andy, she's like hitting bombs out of the field, and she's also hitting bloopers into the outfield too.
Yeah, absolutely. The consistency of Heidi, when you look at this chart, is pretty striking. as is Ego, with the exception of Update, which I think is notable. You know, if you look at it, almost every other member of the cast has at least some appearance on Update, with the exception of Ego and the featured players. You know, and I mean, and Cecily, who's kind of her own bag as well too. But the fact that Ego hasn't been able to get him at the Update desk, despite being fairly stellar and significant in the other three categories for the most part, I think it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And one other thing that stands out to me is I'm looking at Maya Rudolph, who we have like at the bottom of this chart. And, when you're talking about her, we take cold opens out of the sketch calculation, but if you look at Maya's sketches, she's been in 6 minutes and 47 seconds of sketches. And a lot of people would say, well, like they're putting Maya in everything, but she's really not. I mean, if you look at her total screen time for the season, every single cast member has more time in sketches except for Punky and 80 pretty much. So for, those people who are yelling about Maya, being in the show so much, except for, her playing Kamala, no, she's really not. I mean, she's just, as she's the 21st cast member that's there, and she'll like pitch in every now and then. But before I move on for this, Mike, anything else you want to point out about this chart?
I think Andy said it. Ego has just been like, I think we talk about MVPs. She hasn't been the MVP, but like certainly the unsung hero who is like the fabric of, she can just be a great straight man. She's like a, Chris Parnell or somebody who just like put Ego in anything, she'll make it work. And we finally got to see her like have a more comedic role with the Dionne Warwick sketch. I'd like to see her do more of that type of thing where like, yeah, she's not just, maybe she can eat up some scenery and like be funny and be weird and not just like be a news anchor. So I think I should just point out that Ego is like, has time and everything besides Update, like you said, John.
Yeah, and also one of the things I do want to point out here is like people are who are asking about Alex Moffat and is he really underutilized? I mean, he has 27 seconds of pre-tape time this entire season, so that is an area. Even though we're going to get more cold open time with him now, I still would love to see him get more time in the pre-tapes. He's the second lowest pre-tape score or amount of pre-tape time for the season, right after Melissa and right before Bowen, who are all like under a minute in pre-tapes this entire season. But yeah, like we said, that there's a lot of younger cast members that that we can take this chart and examine it and look at certain areas that you could circle for them to improve for the second half of the season. So let me bring up what you have next, Mike. And okay, so right here, what I just brought up is the SNL cast average screen time per episode. So this is an interesting way of looking at how how much screen time a cast member gets on a given episode. Mike, is there anything that stands out to you here that we should look at? Any cast members that are important given what we've seen in the other charts?
Well, you're going to see more, Kate and more Beck, but I think the thing that SNL fans would find interesting is that the average cast member is seen by the viewers for 3 minutes and 14 seconds. So that's pretty. I think if you ask anybody, they'd probably say, "Oh, 8-9 minutes." There's because again, this is just the average this is seconds and minutes. When I do my screen time percentage, I don't count the intro montage. I don't count the musical performances or any of that, the good nights or anything. But this is just like, how much time are you on my TV screen? So if you're under 3 minutes, like you would think that's pretty forgettable. So the fact that we can point out a funny Kyle Mooney sketch or Bowen Yang or Chris Red is like a testament to them. Like, hey, when you get your pinch hit, to bring up baseball again, it's like when you pinch hit, like make it funny, make it good, because if you're not in those long cold opens or have a weekend update spot, you're not going to get 4 minutes uninterrupted on screen. You're going to be a supporting player, and the camera's on you when you say you're 5 lines, so it's going to total up to be like 40 seconds in that sketch.
Yeah, Andy, what about you? Anything stand out?
I mean, one thing, we were just talking about Heidi Gardner really dominating the update desk. And I think there's a real art, going back to the previous slide, for a cast member who's able to consistently succeed at one of the pillars that Mike has laid out, whether it's, the cold open or the pre-tapes or whatever. So having someone like Kate or Beck dominate consistently, and then having someone like Heidi really find their niche within a particular pillar is very compelling to me, which leads me to my point that again, if this was the beginning of season 46, I would have predicted higher numbers for Bowen Yang and Chloe Fineman, who have both shown a lot of promise whenever they're given the ball, so to speak, back to baseball. But yet their numbers are much lower than someone like Mikey Days, who isn't dominating one of the pillars like Beck or Kate, but still is in the top 6 here. So I'd like to see Bowen and Chloe, who aren't going off and filming a show in Vancouver, really find their niche, whether it's at the update desk or in sketches, like Ego and Heidi have done.
Yeah, and here's the great thing about doing this is that every episode, Mike is gathering more data so that when we get together next time, we could take a look at the trends. Are these cast members' screen time going up or going down? And I would expect, sophomores like Bowen and Chloe, who are in year 2 of the show, I would assume that by the end of year 2, we would see an upwards trajectory of their average screen time. And that's the goal, is that we want to see these cast members grow slowly as they start to take over and become more part of the regular cast. So we were talking about like buy low candidates. Bowen and Chloe could potentially be those as we move forward. We talked about also the danger zones of somebody like investing in a Bowen moving forward, who doesn't really get into pre-tapes. But my hope is that, you can take a look at these areas that they may be deficient in and then improve those in the second half of the season. So before we move on to a chart that I find really interesting, Mike, is there anything else you want to talk about with average screen time?
I guess just a follow-up to what I was saying, just because it's not something that anyone would know. You could watch SNL forever and not just know it offhand. And so hopefully that's a fun thing about episodes like this, is that we're giving you information like that. Is just for context, a host will average 17 minutes, 40 seconds. So, that's over double the top person here, which is Kate. So you really have to make the most of your supporting role when you're with the host, or if you're playing double lead with the host. So I just wanted to point that out, because the host does dominate the show. They get the most leads and they get the most screen time. So it is like not ready for primetime players for a reason, because you're like, when you're up, you're up. So if you're not doing any of these things we've highlighted, like update and cold open, and you're just in a sketch with the host, you better make it funny.
Yeah. And Mike, which host dominated the most this season so far? I know we spoke about the first 6 before, but now that you factor in Jason Bateman, Timothy Chalamet, and Kristen Wiig, did any of those, take the overwhelming host scores that we've seen?
With the power ranking score or screen time?
Both. Is there anything that stood out to you with regards to a host that we had the last 3 episodes?
At the last 3, Kristen Wiig had the highest. I think everyone was surprised to see Chalamet be so high up. He was like the lead in almost every sketch he was in. But Kristen Wiig, being a former cast member, got to do characters, and she was the lead in every sketch besides the pre-tape with Andrew Dismukes and Ego when she came in at the end. So the host with the highest score has been John Mulaney, which is interesting to me, but he had a ton of screen time, so it really kind of warped his score a little bit. He also had some recurring characters too, knows how the show works, maybe brought sketches with him, but he had a 318, and no one else has cleared 300. Issa Rae was the lowest at 182, and the average host score has been 250.
What were the scores for Bateman, Chalamet, and Wiig?
Bateman was 240, Chalamet was 238 right behind him, and then Wiig was 274, which is the second highest. So it would be Mulaney first, Wiig second, and episode 4, was that Adele?
Yeah, that was Adele. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Good information to know. I'm going to bring up this next chart, and this is something that I really wanted Mike to get into because we did adjust our rankings. So let me just bring this up. Okay. And this is a very colorful chart that Mike put together. And Mike, I'm going to let you explain it. It's the percentage of A appearances in the show. So Mike, go ahead.
So I mentioned briefly at the top that I categorize appearances in A, B, C, and D. So D is just off-screen appearance. So typically a voiceover, but sometimes like a picture of someone is in the sketch, but they're not appearing in the sketch. C is typically a non-speaking role or just a background. You have like 3 lines. The example I give is like you play the waiter in a sketch and you bring the food over and you say 1 line, but you're not really a supporting role in that sketch. B is supporting roles, and then A is leads. So this is A appearances, and that's what we're talking about here. So I know this is like a very common SNL fan complaint is who's getting, when the guests come in, are they taking away the spotlight from the cast? And I thought it was funny, I did the math to the decimal point, and it's literally 2/3 to 1/3. So the cast is getting 2/3 of the leads at 66.67%. And then the host and the guests are splitting the other third at 33%.
Yeah, so Haynes, if you're listening, at SNL Has a Cast, they are using 2/3 of the A appearances on cast. So it is something that is good to know. Andy, I'll ask you, because we have this, for those watching on YouTube, we have this chart over here, which is like a pie graph displaying the different percentages of every cast member and how much they're taking the A roles. Anything stand out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's consistent with the other metrics that we've been looking at on the show. Kate and Beck are continuing to get a big slice of the pie, so to speak. But that's not to diminish some of the other contributions. Pete still getting 7.3. Pleasantly surprises me and kind of goes against. How people characterize him as pigeonholed or what have you. And then just kind of going down the role a little bit, you see solid numbers from someone like Kyle Mooney and Heidi Gardner. It'd be nice to see, John, to your point, it'd be interesting to see whether Alex can increase his 3.6 in the weeks ahead. I think you're probably right that he will. And again, like, Chloe and Bo and Yang, right around the 3% mark, disappoints me. And I'm a little shocked to see it. We always think of Melissa Villaseñor being characteristically underutilized by our friends at 8H, but Bowen and Chloe in the same league as her or Alex Moffat. It just makes me curious. I know that they're just sophomores at this point and they have room to grow. But again, I'd like to kind of see them find their foothold a little bit more.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And what I would like to do is, this is the last chart that we're going to look at for tonight. And we have gone over a lot of numbers. And I know, it's a lot to take in if you're not like really sitting down and analyzing everything. But as a panel, I would like to have, a couple of thesis statements, a couple of things that, we want to put out there based on all the information we gathered, this time on By the Numbers, some things that we recommend that are areas to succeed in moving forward and kind of how we think things are going to go. So Mike, I'll start with you. Give me something, an overall point based on all the data that you have gathered so far in the first 9 episodes. What are our conclusions that we can gather about the cast and about anyone that you want to talk about moving forward?
I think it's so top heavy. So we're talking about, I thought it was funny that Kate and Beck were literally tied with the leads. And then we talked about versatility today. So I'm just going to try to summarize those two things. One chart I didn't send you, John, is just the total macro appearances, just like how often are you in the show and in a sketch, whether you're doing a small voiceover or you're the lead. And Beck is ahead of the next person, Keenan second at 29, but Beck has had 39 appearances this season, where Kate has had 26. So just top of my head math, that means that Kate has, if she's had 16 leads, she's probably over 40% of her appearances are leads. So I think, and if you've seen the show this season, which I assume everyone listening has, then you know that after the cold open and the post monologue sketch, like Kate will disappear.
Right.
So she's done the we notice on update, but other than that, she'll kind of disappear. So whether what that says about the rest of the cast, I don't really know what some of them are capable of, but it's so top heavy that I think getting away from the election will help everyone be able to get more leads. Because SNL has a cast, right? But I think those two things are important. That when you have someone like Kate, who it's rumored to be her last season, and if she leaves, if Cecily, Adie, Keenan, Jost, there's just so much open space right there. So for the Bowen Yangs and the Chloe Finemans, who I can't see at all leaving, if they're invited back, where Melissa's and Alex have been there, and Heidi has outperformed them, so I can't see her leaving either. So, and then there's the rookies, who I'm sure that if they come back, they have to get some leads.
Yeah, definitely, Andy. There's going to be a lot of space to fill if there's changeovers moving forward. But anything that you see, for the second half of the season that we can take from these numbers as we begin our analysis and head towards the second half of season 46.
Well, I mean, this year kind of feels like a transition year, which we've seen before. I'm thinking like in the early aughts a little bit when that Hader wig era was kind of winding down. This feels like we might be in that place right now, and I think the numbers kind of support that a little bit. You see some of the newer cast members, relatively like Ego, finding their place in the show and starting to dominate. Same with Heidi, for instance. And again, it like I think I said before, it feels like there's like different segments of the show within the show or something. Like it's like Kate McKinnon has her own variety hour within SNL, and then when she doesn't have the ball, when she doesn't have the opportunity to mug, which is a little disparaging, but let's just say that when Kate isn't given the chance to mug, she's just not there. Like Mike was saying a little bit more diplomatically. So I guess this feels like kind of a really interesting moment in time for the show, and I think the numbers kind of support that. Some cast members are able to break through, with this logjam, as we've discussed, and some, despite the fact that they clearly have charisma and clearly know what they're doing when they get laughs, aren't necessarily being reflected in the screen time.
Yeah, and I look. Like we were talking about, there's so much space to fill, but some of that might come this season. We're talking about the potential of Kate filming a show overseas, potentially missing some episodes. And like you were saying, 14.5% of the A appearances of the season have gone to Kate McKinnon, and that's 14.5% that's available for the other cast members. So I'm going to be really curious if she's not in any of the next 3, 4, 5 episodes, however many we get for the next run. When we get back together after that, I want to look at this chart again and see who ended up taking some of those percentages away from her. That will be my biggest question going into the next few months.
Sorry to interrupt, but and we've already saw a variation of that, as you're saying, when we stopped seeing Jim Carrey and Alec Baldwin post-election. That already created, I think the numbers would support this, that already created a vacuum for the show, and it may be why, at least personally, the last couple of episodes were a little bit more pleasant, because all of a sudden you had that big hole in the first half of the show was freed, and some more cast members got to be liberated and step into the void.
Yeah, and I also think the numbers would support that what you were describing that we had with Jim and Alec at the beginning of the year is basically what we had through SNL, 42, 43, 44, 45. And as we're transitioning into a new presidency, we may end up going to see, cold opens and dominant screen time that is less guest oriented. And I think it's going to be a welcome sight for everybody moving forward.
Yes.
Okay, so this is what I want to do. So we have some interesting conclusions from the data that we've seen so far. Let us know, give us some feedback. Let us know if this data is stuff you like. I will pass all that information over to Mike. We're also going to look as we go through the season at more historical data and do comparisons, which we did a little bit more on our last By the Numbers show, but it's always interesting to get some data from there. But before we finish off tonight, we have a little game that Mike prepared for us. So I'm going to bring this onto the screen. And I guess all three of us will play the game. And you at home, I want to hear your answers to the game as well. So, Mike, I will let you take the hosting chair and you tell us what you have prepared for Andy and I and the audience for today.
So this is the SNL Build a Cast game that I made this morning. It's a variant on things you've seen before, pick your starting rotation or, build your own FanDuel team or whatever. And of course, I had to, use math to back it up. So it is completely legit. It's fair. Of course, I had to do the dollar amount per, score. So I don't know if I'm eligible to play. But what I did is I said you get $25. You have 20 cast members. The entire cast, if you add up all their amounts that I have given them, would be $60. So you can't get everybody, but there are 5 categories. For $5, you can get Beck Bennett, Kate McKinnon, or Colin Jost. For $4, you can get, these are, individually, you can get Adie Bryant, Cecily Strong, Michael Che, or Kenan Thompson for $4. The third group is Pete Davidson, Mikey Day, Heidi Gardner, Kyle Mooney, and Ego Odom. They are $3 each. The fourth group is Chloe Feynman, Alex Moffat, Chris Redd, and Bowen Yang. They are $2 each. And then our lowest tier is $1.50, because I had to make the math work, is Dismukes, Holt, Johnson, and Melissa. They are $1.50 each. So you get $25, which means that you can probably get between 5 to 9 cast members, depending on how you spend your money.
Okay, so this is what I want to do is that we're going to go around the panel, and yes, Mike, I want you to play as well. So what I want to do is we're going to all, think about it for a couple minutes. We're going to put our best, SNL cast that we can. Like Mike said, this is just like daily fantasy. It's like going on, FanDuel, DraftKings, like any of those sites, like you would do for a sports team. And you have to, put together the best lineup you think will be moving forward. Take the data that we gave you at the beginning of the cast and, think about, what we said about which cast members you would buy low on, which ones you would sell high on, which ones you think are going to do well in the second half of the season. And, I want to see your, dream teams that you put together given the budget. So I'm going to give you guys a few minutes for the audio listeners. Just think about it for a second. Like Mike said, I'll repeat the numbers one more time so you guys can maybe pause the podcast, write down your list, and then you'll hear our options. So at $5, and you can pick more than one person in each category, it just has to add up to $25. So for $5, you have Beck, Kate, Colin. For $4, you have Adie, Cecily, Che, and Keenan. $3, you have Pete, Mikey, Heidi, Kyle, Ego. $2, Chloe, Alex, Chris, and Bowen. And $1.50, Dismukes, Lauren, Punky, and Melissa. All right, so Andy, let me start with you. Do you have your SNL cast for $25 that you're ready to put on against anybody else's?
I absolutely do, John. And Mike, I just want to say that I love this game. It takes me back to my Mr. Showbiz days. I don't know if either of you guys ever played that back in the day, but it was with box office, with movies. You could, buy, the Blair Witch Project for $1 or whatever. And then the Blair Witch Project became a huge hit. So this this is very much cool. So I appreciate it. So for $25, here is my starting lineup, and I'll try to provide some commentary as to my decisions in real time here. So my number one seed out of the $5 category was Beck Bennett. No disrespect to Kate or Colin, but as we've discussed throughout the show, I think Beck has been essential to the cold opens. I think he's an incredibly versatile performer, whether we're talking sketches or whether we're talking the pre-tapes. So he's my number one. My number twos are Pete, Ego, and Heidi, just because I think each one of them has distinguished themselves, in various ways. Whether it's Heidi on Update or Ego or Pete. I think they aren't necessarily the faces of the show, but they've also demonstrated a certain voice or personality that shows why they're there, essentially.
They're each for $3.
Yes, and those are each for $3. So that gets me up to 14. So the remaining $16. I'm sorry, I skipped over my number 4 category entirely. You always need an update face, right? Someone's got to host Weekend Update. For me, that's Michael Che. So that's $14 or $4 right there. Michael Che. So that gets me to 18. I love how caustic Che gets. I love the drinking that he does occasionally. And I just think that you need that kind of contrarianism and that bite at Update. He takes it back to that Norm Macdonald style. Again, not a shot at Colin Jost at all. So then we get into our 2 range. For me, that's Chloe Fineman and Bowen Yang. As I was saying earlier, I think they're both hilarious. I think they both have great opportunity. They just need to kind of stand up and meet the challenges a little bit more this season, which I don't think is their fault. But I think that they both have incredible talent, and I'd like to see more of them. And that gets me to my remaining, I think I'm at $22. So I have $3 left. And that gets me to the final category, the featured players, essentially, but not always, because my number 1 seed here is going to go to Melissa, who I'm always rooting for. I think the show doesn't quite know what to do with her, but as we saw with her Dolly Parton, she brings a lot of heart, and her impressions are impeccable, frankly. So she's sweet, and she gets the $1.50 late round pickup. And then my final draft is Punky Johnson. Just because I'd love to see her do more on the show. I nearly went with Andrew Smukes, but I just love when stand-ups, are brought into the fold. And I think that if she's given more opportunity to shine, we can really see what she has to offer. So that is my starting lineup. It is about, let me see, 8 maybe not. 10, which I think is a good number for an SNL cast as well too. So that's what I got.
Repeat the 10 so that everybody knows who your 10 are. Yeah.
Great, absolutely. So it's Beck Bennett, Heidi Gardner, Ego Nordum, Pete Davidson, Chloe Fineman, Bowen Yang, Punky Johnson, Melissa Villasenor, and rounding us out at the update disc, Michael Che.
Awesome. So I think my cast crushes your cast.
Okay.
This is the thing. I've always loved the smaller casts. So I know you only had 10 people. You took 10 of the 20. I actually ended up choosing 7 of the 20, and I'm okay with it because I think that these 7 people, you create a cast of these 7. I think they're going to kill it. So here's my cast. I took nobody in the $1.50 range. No offense to Andrew or Lauren or Punky or Melissa, but I just haven't seen enough from you guys yet. And we want to see more. I love Melissa. I want to see more Punky. Lauren, we're starting to get a little bit. Andrew, we want to see more. But I don't feel confident that if I'm going to put a cast that's only 7 or 8 people together, I don't feel comfortable putting you guys in, even though you guys come at a lower price. And then we're talking in the $2 range. And, Chloe, who I think is a star, she's the hardest person that I left out of my cast. Like, I was having the most trouble trying to fit her in, but I just couldn't do it. I couldn't drop anybody else out. And, Chris and Bowen still want to see more from you guys. But Alex Moffat. I mean, if you guys watch this show, you know that I love Alex, and I'm so happy that he is the president now. The fact that, he could play our future president, I had to have him, on my cast. So Alex is for sure. I'm spending $2 on Alex. And then in the $3 range, I go through the options: Pete, Mikey, Heidi, Kyle, Ego. And I just think you have, in this category, you have two dynamic women who can play so many characters for years to come. We talked about Heidi killing it on updates. Ego's amazing in pre-tapes. So I chose Heidi and Ego as two women from this category. Sorry, Pete. Sorry, Mikey. Sorry, Kyle. I know Mikey is, amazing and everything, but I'm going to end up picking someone, pretty similar to Mikey coming up. And, I have Heidi, Ego, and then I had my Alex Moffat. And then in the $4 range, here's where things get interesting. I saved a lot of my money here. So I ended up using a lot of my $4 budget in the range over here. And I ended up going with Cecily Strong, Kenan Thompson, and Michael Che. So I spent $12 in this $4 range. Cecily, obviously completely dynamic, can play so many different characters. Che will be my update host, and he can host alone. I feel confident in it. And Kenan could, as we see, he's blended into every cast he's been a part of. He could be in any cast moving forward. And then in the $5 range, Beck, Kate, Colin, all great options. But I ended up going with Beck Bennett, who is, as we've been told, is the MVP and always kills it in every sketch he's in. He's constantly getting screen time. So I just felt like that cast of 7 people is a cast that I can move forward in and be like, this is a killer cast. So for me, it's Beck Bennett at the $5 range, Cecily, Kenan, and Che at the $4 range, Ego and Heidi at $3 range, and Alex at $2. And that is my cast. Mike, I dare you to beat it.
Well, I'm very happy that you guys took it so seriously and did the math.
We're competitive.
I'm a math guy, so I like your hustle. I did do this fairly because I didn't pick a cast before we recorded this. Because otherwise I would have just crunched the numbers for 4.5 hours. So I made 2, and I'm gonna just go with my gut and pick one. So mine. So John, how many did you have? 8.
I had 7 people.
You had 7. Andy, how many did you have?
10.
Okay, well I have 11. So in no particular order, I just list them off, but I'm gonna. All right, we'll go with. I'm going with my B team here. I'm feeling good. All right, so I'm gonna go with Ego and Heidi were the first I picked because their value is too good. It's just right in the middle. I just think that there's no way that they're going anywhere. No matter what happens, if Kate's not in the show, if she's in the show, I can count on Heidi and Ego making regular appearances. They're probably going to be averaging 3.5, 4 appearances together. So that's $6. I'm going with Kate because she's number 1 off the board. I'm going to go with Kate and Beck. So I'm going to go with Mikey Day, Chloe Feynman, Chris Red. So that there is my 3s and 2s. I have Beck, I have Kate. I didn't take anyone from the 4s. And then I did Mikey, Heidi, and Ego from the 3s. And then let me make sure my 2s are correct. I did take Chloe, Alex, Chris, and Bowen. So I didn't take any 4s. I went high on 2s. And then I had $3 left over. So I went with Punky and Lauren because I'm going to buy low on them. Because especially if we have more openings for women on the show, for Punky, and Andrew, you kind of really can't be any lower than they already are. So they have to go up. That's why they're valued so low right now. And so Punky and Lauren are my bottom 2 for $3. So that's wholesale at 25. I'll review. That's Ego, Heidi, Mikey, Chloe, Beck, Lauren, Chris Red, Bowen Yang, Alex Moffat, and Punky Johnson.
Yeah, and it totally makes sense. I mean, we're going with 7 versus 10 versus 11 cast members. I mean, I know 7 is a little bit small. That's like our original cast, but you know, it would be so cool to have like a cast of 7 people one day again, and the 7 that I chose, I will fight for. So, but I like all of our teams, and I can't wait to see what the audience thinks. If you guys want to come up with your favorite teams, you know, tweet us at them, put them in the YouTube comments. Let us know, you know, what your favorite teams are that you can put together with this $25 range, and potentially we can do this again later in the season where Mike will raise the values for people who are doing better on the show and lower the values for people who aren't.
I will say, John, you make an excellent point. Now I've had a moment to process about Alex Moffat as Biden. I think if you are assembling a starting lineup like that, you know, I might need to rescind. You know, or drop Punky or Melissa and pick up Alex there, because you make a lot of sense on that one.
Thank you. I'm glad I convinced you of something. Okay, well, this has been really fun. This is a great first show of 2021. It was so good to get back together with you guys and go over the numbers. Like I said, give us your feedback. Let us know what you liked. It's just really great that Mike puts all this work in. So Mike, you know, hats off to you for taking care of all that stuff. And Mike, why don't we start with, you know, anything that you want to plug or you know, talk to the audience about with regards to your analytics, because I know you don't just cover SNL, you do analytics for other things as well. So tell the audience a little bit about what you do.
Just giving math and stats a try in the worlds that doesn't have math and stats. So we know sports are covered. We know that. So there's no use going into it. I mean, I obviously follow it, and I try to find stats that I can't find anywhere else and make them up myself. But SNL is a great one because I've just never seen it done before. And I guess to answer your question is just like, you know, get involved, you know, let me know what you think. If there's something that you really think that we haven't covered, then that's awesome, because it'll give us more to talk about, and maybe you will, you know, open it wide open. But I would say, yeah, definitely just see. It's also fun to guess. So predict who you think will score number 1, or just you know, I want you to look at the chart and see, wow, I'm really surprised that they're that low or they're that high, because as we talked about at the very beginning of this, there's objective and subjective. If you're a big Kyle fan, like I'm a big Kyle fan, or you're a big Melissa fan, you might have just loved their sketch that night and they're the MVP in your eyes. So things like that, I think they're interesting because they are subjective. So we're taking an objective look at that and finding ways to improve it. So when I started doing this a few years ago, it was only just counting how many times I saw someone, tallying it, and then it was just timing their screen time. So I don't see this getting more complicated. I'm just seeing it get more accurate.
Exactly. And like I said, hats off to you. Where can people reach out to you if they want to ask you questions about any of this stuff and talk to you a little bit more about stats?
My Twitter and my Reddit are the same. So it would be user on Reddit would be MMVRRAY. Or Twitter would be at MMVRRAY.
Perfect. Thanks again, Mike. And Andy, you know, thank you for joining us again. I know I love going through the numbers with you and hearing your opinion. Do you have anything that you want to plug, and where can people reach out to you?
Well, as always, people can hit me up on the Twitter at SNL in Review. I guess, you know, I recently, with the end of 2020, tweeted, you know, a little summary of my clips that I put out with Vulture and Entertainment Weekly. So if people want to check out that thread, they can read all the different interviews that I've done with cast alum in spite of the pandemic. Also, you know, I tweeted out this picture, but on New Year's Eve, I had the opportunity to meet with season 6 cast member Matthew Lawrence at a Starbucks in Lexington, Kentucky. Great guy. You know, definitely feel free to check out, you know, him on Twitter as well too, and take a look at the pic of us that I posted, because he's a nice guy who bought me a hot chocolate on New Year's Eve. So other than that, just keep taking a look at the show recaps that I'm doing live during each episode on Entertainment Weekly's website, EW.com. And last but not least, I just wanted to show everybody what my wife bought me for Christmas, which is Mr. Bill.
Okay.
Kind of spot like that. There we go. Box.
You treat that Mr. Bill right, Andy.
Yeah, well, he's actually technically a dog toy, so he's not had a great life so far. So we'll see if he sticks around for the next episode or not.
Very fitting, very fitting. Yeah, that's great. Like I said, happy to have you join us, and you will be joining us again later on in the season for some episode recaps and more by the numbers as we head towards the second half of season 46. Thank you all for joining us again in 2021. I'm so excited. We have so many great plans for SNL Stats and the shows we have coming up. We have more great off-week shows and interviews and things that I think you guys will really enjoy. So please make sure to subscribe to SNL Stats on YouTube and on any podcatcher. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram. It's always at SNL Stats to never miss a show. And next week, as we did in our first few off weeks that we had between the initial run and the next one, I handed the keys over to some of our super fans, and I'm going to be doing the same thing. So next week, we have our super fan takeover. We have some of our super fans who are going to be joining us. They're going to play some fun games. And if you haven't checked out that show and you're thinking, John's not on this one, why would I check this one out? Well, you really should, because we have some great personalities and people who have watched SNL for years that play lots of games and have fun and talk about the show. And it's just a really nice casual listen for somebody during the off week, and I think you'll really enjoy it. So give it a try. And then I'll be back in a couple weeks' time with some fun content for you guys. So thank you all so much for joining us. For everybody at SNL Stats, we thank you. Good night and have a pleasant week ahead. We will see you next time.